pain in my heart.
Two record labels, two cities, two completely different strategies for surviving in America. Motown was in Detroit, Stax was in Memphis. Both made black music, both changed the world.
I bet you're wondering how I knew.
But when the riots came, when Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, and cities across America started burning, one of those labels was operating 2 miles from the murder scene, and one of them was already protected.
I bet you're wondering how I knew.
Tonight we go inside the 10 real stories that explain the difference. Why Motown artists were on Ed Sullivan while Stax was watching its entire catalog disappear into someone else's contract. This is the integration paradox.
Now if you feel that you can't go on.
Before we get into the 10 songs, you need to understand what happened to Stax, because it wasn't just the riots. It was 3 disasters in less than 5 months. December 1967, Otis Redding, the heart and soul of Stax Records, died in a plane crash in Lake Monona, Wisconsin. He was 26 years old. He recorded his last song 3 days before he died.
Where can she be?
Then, spring 1968, Stax's distribution deal with Atlantic Records expired, and Jim Stewart, the label's founder, discovered a contract clause he had never read.
Come back, baby.
Atlantic owned everything. Every master recording Stax had made between 1960 and 1967. Every song, every hit, every record.
Wake up a restless.
As music historian James L. Dickerson wrote, unknown to Jim, the original agreement had transferred ownership of the Stax master tapes to Atlantic. It was spelled out in the fine print, but Jim had not read the fine print.
You love me, love me, love me.
Stax was now a record company with no back catalog, no distribution deal, and no biggest star.
I began to get rough. Said I want you.
Then, on April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel, 2 miles from Stax Records, the same hotel where Stax songwriters had written some of their biggest hits.
Baby, will I get enough?
Riots erupted across America. Al Bell, Stax's vice president, said later, "There was looting and rioting in the cities we were touring in."
Wake up a restless night.
Record sales were down because a lot of the stores had been bombed out. It just had a trickle-down effect.
Just won't let me be.
Stax survived the riots physically. Its building was left untouched by the Memphis community out of respect for what the label had built. But the spirit inside, the interracial harmony that made the music, it was never quite the same.
Lord, and I can't even.
Stax went bankrupt in 1975. Jim Stewart remortgaged his own home to keep it alive. He lost the house when the label collapsed.
Oh, little pain.
That is what was happening in Memphis. Now let's talk about what was happening in Detroit.
And all the days.
Number 10, The Marvelettes. Please, Mr. Postman, 1961. 5 teenage girls from Inkster, Michigan walked into their high school talent show in 1960. They came in 4th place.
Oh, yeah.
The top 3 finishers won auditions for Motown Records. The Marvelettes didn't win, but 2 of their school teachers convinced Motown executives to let them audition anyway. They went back to Berry Gordy with a song, a blues number given to them by a local songwriter named William Garrett. One of the group's members, Georgia Dobbins, had taken it home and rewritten it as a pop song for a young girl group. Then Georgia Dobbins left the group before they signed the contract. Her father wouldn't allow it. The remaining five, Gladys Horton, Wanda Young, Katherine Anderson, Georgiana Tillman, and Juanita Cowart, walked into Studio A. It was their first time inside a professional recording studio. Florence Ballard of the Supremes, also a young singer trying to find her footing at Motown, was there that day. She told them, "Just relax. You're tight and petrified. Relax." They relaxed. The drummer on the session was a skinny 22-year-old who had just started working at Motown. His name was Marvin Gaye. Please Mr. Postman was released on August 21, 1961. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in December 1961. #1 on the R&B chart, a million-selling record, Motown's very first #1 single. The Beatles heard it, covered it in 1963 on their second album. With the Beatles, John Lennon sang lead. The Carpenters heard it. Their version went to #1 in 1975, 14 years after the original. Richard Carpenter was 15 years old when the Marvelettes version first charted. He never forgot it. 5 teenage girls who came in 4th place at a high school talent show in Inkster, Michigan, launched the greatest black-owned music business in American history. And they did it in Studio A, in a city that was still 2 years away from its own riots. Number 9, The Supremes, Baby Love, 1964. Berry Gordy told the Supremes something that no one else in the industry was willing to say out loud to 3 black girls from the Brewster Douglas projects. He said, "I am getting you ready to perform at the White House and Buckingham Palace." He wasn't exaggerating. Gordy hired Maxine Powell, a Detroit finishing school and modeling agency director, to run what he called the Artist Development Department. For 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, every Motown artist in Detroit was required to attend Powell's sessions. Powell taught posture, public speaking, etiquette, stage presence, how to walk into a room, how to take a bow, how to look a television camera in the eye without blinking. Diana Ross called Maxine Powell the person who taught me everything I know. The Supremes performed on the Ed Sullivan Show 15 times between 1964 and 1969. 15. Motown's head of sales, Barney Ailes, said, "It was really a battle to get black artists on network television in prime time. Sammy Davis Jr. and Nat Cole were about the only ones. But when the Supremes broke through, we knew we had an opportunity. They looked so great as well as sounding great." Baby Love was released in August 1964. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on October 31, 1964, staying there for 4 weeks. Then it hit #1 in the United Kingdom, making the Supremes the first black female group ever to reach #1 in the UK. Oprah Winfrey was 10 years old the first time she saw the Supremes on Ed Sullivan. She wrote Diana Ross a letter about it decades later. She read it on her show.
Why you do me like you do?
She said, "I was mesmerized. I had never seen black women on television who conveyed such a glamour and such grace. You represented beauty, and more important, hope. Hope that my life could be better." That is what Maxine Powell built. That is what Berry Gordy understood that Stax never fully operationalized. Not just great music, but an image that could cross every line America had drawn.
Till it's hurt me. Ooh.
Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 8, Little Stevie Wonder. Fingertips, 1963.
Jump up and down, do anything that you wanna do.
Berry Gordy was not easily impressed. He had sat through hundreds of auditions. He had heard every type of young talent Detroit had to offer. And when an 11-year-old blind boy from Saginaw, Michigan walked into Hitsville, U.S., A taught himself harmonica, piano, bongos, and drums entirely by ear. Gordy said he was speechless. Stevland Hardaway Morris had been singing in his church choir at age 4, busking on the streets at 10. He was signed to Motown at 11 and renamed Little Stevie Wonder. His first 3 singles went nowhere. Then Berry Gordy put him on the Motown Review, the touring road show that carried Motown's acts across the country to play live audiences in theaters and clubs. At the Regal Theater in Chicago in 1962, Stevie Wonder played harmonica and worked the crowd with an energy that nobody in the room was ready for. At the end of his set with Mary Wells waiting in the wings to perform, Stevie didn't leave the stage. He just kept going. The bass player who had just set up for Mary Wells' set was caught completely off guard.
Clap your hands.
You can hear him on the live recording asking, "What key? What key?" Nobody had told him Stevie wasn't finished. Gordy captured it on tape, released it as Fingertips 2 on May 21, 1963. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on August 4, 1963. Stayed for 3 weeks. Stevie Wonder became the youngest solo artist ever to top the Hot 100. He was 13 years old. His live album, recorded live. The 12-year-old genius hit number 1 on the Billboard 200 the same week, making him the first artist in history to hold a number 1 single and number 1 album simultaneously. The drum figure that opens the recording, played by Marvin Gaye, who was still a Motown house musician, still finding his own footing. 2 geniuses on the same tape, in a city that was about to change the world. Number 7, The Four Tops. Reach Out, I'll Be There, 1966. Lamont Dozier said he wanted to write a journey of emotions with sustained tension like a bolero. He said they wanted Levi Stubbs to shout-sing the lyrics. They were influenced by Bob Dylan at the time.
Me. Reach out for me.
They told Stubbs to sing it like Dylan singing like a Rolling Stone. Phil Spector heard the final record and called it Black Dylan. Reach Out, I'll Be There was recorded in 2 takes. 2. The Four Tops had barely rehearsed it. Released August 18, 1966. Number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, October 15 and 22, 1966. Number 1 on the R&B chart for 2 weeks. Number 1 in the United Kingdom, October 27, 1966. Stayed there for 3 weeks. Knocked Jim Reeves' Distant Drums off the top. Was itself knocked off by the Beach Boys' Good Vibration. 3 of the most iconic records of 1966, sharing the top of the UK chart in a single month. Holland Dozier Holland had intentionally put Levi Stubbs at the very top of his vocal range on every line to make sure, as Four Tops member Abdul Fakir said, he'd have that cry and hunger and wailing in his voice. Arranger Paul Reiser overdubbed piccolo and flute in the intro. The drum sound came from timpani mallets striking a tambourine head. There is no instrument on that record that does what it was originally made to do. Everything is repurposed. Everything is transformed. That is Motown in one song. Rolling Stone ranked it number 206 on its list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. The Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Recording Registry in 2022. And in 1966, while this song was at number 1 in 17 countries, Memphis was a city approaching its breaking point.
I know what you're thinking. You're alone now.
2 years before King was killed, 2 years before the sanitation workers' strike, 2 years before the Lorraine Motel. The Four Tops were reaching out across the world. Stax was still inside its own neighborhood.
Just look over your shoulder.
Number 6, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, The Tracks of My Tears, 1965. The song started with a guitar riff. Marv Tarplin, the Miracles guitarist, had a melody. Just a melody, no words, no title. He played it for Smokey Robinson. Smokey said, "What does that sound like to you?"
Loud and hearty, deep in.
And somewhere in the space between the notes, a song about wearing a smile as a mask, about hiding heartbreak behind a performance, came forward.
People say I'm the life of the party.
The Tracks of My Tears was written by Smokey Robinson, Pete Moore, and Marv Tarplin. Recorded at Hitsville, USA on May 19, 1965.
Since you left me, if you see me with.
Released June 23, 1965. Number 2 on the R&B chart. Number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not a number 1, but something far more durable than a chart position.
Although she may be cute.
Rolling Stone named it number 50 on their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time in 2020. In 2021, Rolling Stone asked music critics and journalists to vote on the greatest Motown song ever recorded. The Tracks of My Tears came in first. The greatest Motown song of all time. During the Beatles' famous Get Back recording sessions on January 6, 1969, George Harrison led the other Beatles into an impromptu rendition of The Tracks of My Tears.
The permanent one. So take
A panel of 20 top industry songwriters and producers, including Hal David, Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson, and Jerry Leiber, ranked it number 5 on their list of the top 10 best songs of all time for Britain's Mojo magazine.
I'm masquerading.
Paul McCartney has said Smokey Robinson is his favorite songwriter. This is the song he was talking about. And the reason it reached white America, the reason Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson, George Harrison, and a generation of British musicians heard it at all, was because Berry Gordy built a white sales team with relationships in pop radio that no black-owned label in America had constructed before.
You put me down, my smile is my...
Smokey Robinson didn't write crossover music. He wrote music that was undeniably, universally human. But Gordy built the highway it traveled on.
You'll see my smile.
Number 5, Marvin Gaye, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, 1968. This song should never have existed. Berry Gordy blocked it twice. Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong wrote it in 1966. The Miracles recorded it. Gordy vetoed it.
I bet you're wondering how I knew.
Whitfield recorded it with Marvin Gaye in 1967. Gordy vetoed it again. He didn't think it was commercial. He didn't think it was right for Marvin's image.
It took me by surprise, I must say.
So Whitfield took it to Gladys Knight and the Pips. New arrangement, faster, more up-tempo. Gordy approved it. That version was released in September 1967. It reached number 2 on the Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart for 6 weeks. Motown's biggest hit at that point. But Whitfield still believed in Marvin's version. He lobbied Gordy to put it on Marvin's next album, In the Groove, in August 1968. And then, radio station Devon in Chicago started playing it as an album track. The phones went crazy. Gordy relented, released it as a single on October 30, 1968. It entered the Hot 100 at number 34, the highest new entry of the week. It hit number 1 on December 14, 1968, stayed there for 7 consecutive weeks. Number 1 on the Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart, number 1 in the United Kingdom.
Been confused if it's true.
The biggest selling Motown single in history up to that point. Inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998. When Marvin Gaye heard about its success, he acted coldly to it.
Please tell me, dear, do you play?
He later told a biographer he felt the song's success was undeserved because he was still grieving the illness of his singing partner, Tammy Terrell, who had collapsed in his arms on stage in 1967.
Would you be my baby?
The biggest hit Motown had ever released, and the man at the center of it couldn't bring himself to celebrate. That year, Stax Records had no distribution deal, no back catalog, no Otis Redding, and a city still burning 2 miles down the road. Motown had 7 weeks at number 1. Number 4, Martha and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street, 1964. Martha Reeves has said it 100 times. It was a party song, a summer song, a song about dancing. She has never wavered. Dancing in the Street was written by Marvin Gaye, William Mickey Stevenson, and Ivy Jo Hunter. It was originally intended for Kim Weston, another Motown artist who passed on it. Martha Reeves happened to be in the building. She was working as a secretary at Motown at the time, filing papers and answering phones for the A&R department while waiting for her own shot as an artist. she heard the track, she asked to record it, and she sang it like her whole life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Dancing in the Street was released July 31, 1964, number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 4 on the R&B chart, became a defining sound of American summer. Then came the Detroit riots of July 1967. 43 people dead, over 2,000 buildings burned. The National Guard and U.S. Army deployed in the streets. Radio stations in several cities pulled Dancing in the Street from rotation. They heard something in the lyrics that Martha always insisted was never there, calling out around the world. Are you ready for a brand new beat? Summer's here and the time is right. Whether Martha meant a protest or a party, the country was no longer sure. And here is what makes this story cut so deep. When the riots broke out in Detroit, Martha Reeves was on tour. She came home to a city she barely recognized. Berry Gordy received threatening phone calls at Hitsville during the riots. The staff was terrified. The studio went silent. Mary Wilson of the Supremes wrote later that the Detroit unrest was part of the reason Gordy eventually moved the label west. A party song became a protest anthem became a reason to leave, and still the song played everywhere because Motown had already built the infrastructure to make sure it would. Number 3, The Temptations, My Girl, 1964.
When it's cold outside.
Smokey Robinson wrote it backstage at the Apollo Theater. The Miracles and the Temptations were both on the same package tour. Smokey had just written My Guy for Mary Wells. He decided to write its answer from a man's perspective. He co-wrote it with his Miracles bandmate Ronald White during the gaps between sets. The Temptations heard it and convinced Smokey to give it to them instead of keeping it for the Miracles. It was David Ruffin's first time as lead singer on a Temptations single. Smokey told Jimmy Fallon he deliberately crafted it as something sweet to balance out Ruffin's naturally commanding tone. My Girl was recorded at Hitsville, USA on September 25, 1964. Released December 21, 1964. James Jamerson played the bass line. Robert White played the ascending guitar figure that opens the song. Arranger Paul Reiser filled in the strings. Number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, The Temptations' first ever chart topper. Billboard's 10th biggest hit of 1965. Over 150 artists have covered it. It has been played at more American weddings than any other soul song in history. And then Otis Redding heard it. Otis Redding, the king of Stax Records, loved My Girl so much he recorded his own version. His version reached number 11 in the United Kingdom. That is the integration paradox in a single detail. The polished Motown version, strings, structure, Maxine Powell precision. The raw Stax version, rougher, more visceral, bleeding more. Both versions existed because the same song could live in two different Americas. In 1965, only one of those Americas was being broadcast on Ed Sullivan into 60 million living rooms every Sunday night. Number 2, Gladys Knight and the Pips. I Heard It Through the Grapevine, 1967. We covered Marvin Gaye's version at number 5, but Gladys Knight got there first, and her story is different. And it belongs here, because Gladys Knight represents the paradox most perfectly. Her version of Grapevine was the one Berry Gordy approved. Faster, more gospel, more accessible for mainstream radio. It reached number 2 on the Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart for 6 weeks. It was Motown's biggest selling single at that point, and then Marvin's version eclipsed it. Gladys Knight and the Pips had been on Motown since 1966. 7 years she would stay. 7 years of watching Diana Ross get the film deals, the full-page ads, the cover of Life magazine. Gladys Knight, with arguably the most powerful female voice in the history of the label, was consistently treated as second tier. In 1973, Buddha Records made an offer worth close to $1 million. Gladys Knight said later that had Motown matched it, they would have stayed. Motown didn't match it. Before she left, she recorded one last single for the label. Neither one of us wants to be the first to say goodbye. A slow, aching ballad about two people who know it's over but can't say the words. It won the Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a duo or group in 1973. Gladys Knight said years later that the song was exactly what she wanted to say to Motown after 7 years of being overlooked. She let the song say it for her. At Buddha Records, without Berry Gordy, she recorded Midnight Train to Georgia, #1 pop, #1 R&B, Grammy Award for Best R&B Vocal Performance by a duo or group. The song Motown never got to put out. And the integration paradox runs right through this story, because Motown's strategy of mainstream polish and crossover appeal was the same strategy that made artists like Gladys Knight feel they had to suppress their rawness to fit the machine. She thrived at Motown, and she thrived even more after she left. #1, Stevie Wonder, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours, 1970. By 1970, Stevie Wonder was 20 years old. He had been on Motown for 9 years. He had been #1 on the Hot 100 as a 13-year-old. He had been molded, shaped, packaged, and sent out to perform for an America that Berry Gordy had spent a decade preparing for him.
Now I'm back and not ashamed to cry.
But now Stevie was 20, and his contract was about to expire, and Berry Gordy was terrified of losing him because Stevie Wonder had quietly become the most important artist on the label.
I really didn't mean.
Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours was the first song Stevie ever produced himself. He co-wrote it with Lee Garrett, Serata Wright, and his mother, Lula Mae Hardaway. He took full creative control for the first time. He played multiple instruments on the track. He drove the entire session himself.
Ooh, baby, here I am, signed, sealed.
Released July 6, 1970, #1 on the R&B chart for 6 weeks, #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the real story isn't the chart. The real story is what Stevie negotiated when his contract came up in 1971. he signed a new deal that gave him complete creative control over his music, his own production company, his own publishing, the ability to make whatever he wanted. And what he made with that freedom was Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Fulfillingness, First Finale, Songs in the Key of Life. 5 albums in 4 years that are considered among the greatest recordings in the history of American music. Rolling Stone ranked Songs in the Key of Life number 4 on the 500 greatest albums of all time. Talking Book, Inner Visions, 3 Grammy wins in a row for Album of the Year. No artist before or since has ever done that. And at the time of Motown's sale to MCA in 1988, Stevie Wonder had contractual approval over the transaction. It was written into his deal, no sale without Stevie's consent. Berry Gordy told him, "I want to take the legacy and put it in stronger hands." Stevie gave his consent. The boy who couldn't be controlled on stage at the Regal Theater in Chicago in 1962, the one who kept playing after his set was supposed to end, became the one person on earth whose signature Berry Gordy needed to close the deal on the empire he had built. That is not just a music story. That is the full arc of the integration paradox. A black-owned company built on a crossover strategy, protected at its most critical moment by the one artist who had demanded and won the right to be fully himself.